Let me ask you something. What's the most expensive mistake you've ever made? A bad investment? A car crash? A business deal gone wrong? Now imagine spilling a cup of coffee, and it costs your father $320,000. Not in today's money. In 1947, this is the story of a spoiled mob prince who laughed at the wrong man in the wrong neighborhood. And in just 12 hours, he was tied to a chair wearing a price tag. Welcome back to Bumpy Johnson Devoting Dark History. Tonight, we're stepping inside Harlem, August 12th, 1947, and we're about to witness a lesson about respect that cost more than most houses in New York. Harlem in 1947 wasn't just a neighborhood, it was a chessboard of power. Every corner, every nightclub, every restaurant held stories of alliances and betrayals. Small's Paradise on 135th Street and 7th Avenue was more than a nightclub. It was neutral ground, a place where mobsters, entertainers, politicians, and criminals all mingled. But one man's presence there sent a message louder than any gunshot. Bumpy Johnson, the man who controlled Harlem's streets, whose quiet authority demanded respect, and who, every Tuesday and Friday morning for 6 years, sat at the same corner booth, reading the newspaper, sipping his Cuban coffee. Unbothered by the chaos of the world outside, no one challenged Bumpy Johnson, not because they feared him blindly, but because he had built his empire with brains, strategy, and a reputation that spoke before he ever did. And yet, on that fateful morning, a 19-year-old spoiled son of a powerful Italian mobster strolled through Small's Paradise, carrying a cup of coffee, walking with arrogance born of privilege, and he collided with Bumpy's booth, spilling coffee over the newspaper, the table, and Bumpy's sleeve. Most people would have apologized, offered to pay, taken a step back. But this kid laughed, not nervously, not awkwardly, but with contempt. A laugh that would echo in Harlem's criminal underworld for hours. And then he said it. "Watch where you're sitting, old man. Maybe get a table that's not in the middle of the walkway if you don't want people bumping into you." The restaurant went silent. Waiters froze mid-step. Conversations stopped. Every person there understood immediately that this wasn't just rudeness. It was a direct, public challenge to Bumpy Johnson, in his own neighborhood, in front of witnesses, and in front of the boy's father, little Augie Genovese, who suddenly realized that his son's arrogance had just triggered a situation that could not be solved by money, apology, or negotiation. Bumpy didn't rise, he didn't shout, he didn't gesture, he simply looked, assessed, calculated, and in that silent look, little Augie knew exactly what was coming. Consequences, a lesson in respect, that would cost $320,000, and teach a spoiled 19-year-old boy that power isn't inherited, privilege doesn't guarantee survival, and mocking the wrong man, in the wrong neighborhood, could become the most expensive cup of coffee in New York history. Harlem, in 1947, wasn't just music and poetry. It was territory. It was business. Every street corner, every brownstone, every club held power, alliances, and unspoken rules. And at the heart of it all was 135th Street and 7th Avenue, where Small's Paradise stood, a legendary nightclub and restaurant, neutral ground in a city of rival factions, a place where Italian mobsters, black operators, entertainers, and politicians could meet. Without guns, without chaos, without the constant threat of violence, it was rare. It was sacred. It was the beating heart of Harlem. And in the midst of all that, Bumpy Johnson sat at his regular corner booth every Tuesday and Friday morning for 6 years, not because he loved routine, but because presence was power. His Cuban coffee steaming in a heavy ceramic mug, newspaper open in front of him, reading stories about the President's Committee on Civil Rights that Truman had just created to investigate racial violence in the South. Even in politics, even in law, even in chaos. Bumpy's eyes and reputation spoke louder than any headline, and everyone knew it. See, Small's Paradise wasn't just a nightclub, it was strategy, it was observation, it was influence. Bumpy's booth gave him visibility, access, and intelligence. Casual conversations over breakfast revealed more than meetings ever could. Everyone who mattered in Harlem's underworld walked past that booth, and everyone knew better than to disrespect the man who controlled the streets without firing a shot. That was dominance, and that dominance was about to be tested. There's a difference between power and protection. Power is earned. Protection is borrowed. Anthony Genovese Jr., 19 years old, had never earned anything. He inherited confidence. He inherited arrogance. He inherited the belief that his father's name made him untouchable, that the world would bend around him because of privilege, wealth, and connections. He was the eldest son of a capo in the Genovese organization, raised with money, respect, and a dangerous sense of entitlement, but raised without wisdom, without understanding the rules that governed the streets he was stepping into, and that ignorance was about to collide with reality. Anthony Jr. strolled through Small's Paradise that morning as if he owned it, carrying a cup of coffee, shoulders back, chin high, and eyes scanning without seeing. He was taught to command attention, but not taught how to earn it, to move with confidence, but not with caution. Privilege had insulated him from consequences for nearly 2 decades, until the moment his path walked directly into the back of Bumpy Johnson's booth. A collision of arrogance and authority that would set off a chain of events worth $320,000, all over a spilled cup of coffee. No one in that restaurant could mistake it. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't carelessness. It was entitlement. A spoiled boy testing the boundaries of a man whose reputation had been built over decades. Bumpy Johnson didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He simply looked. And in that silent gaze, Anthony Jr. had just met a world where respect couldn't be bought, where his father's name didn't automatically protect him, and where one thoughtless action could cost more than he ever imagined. It happened at 9:47 a.m. Anthony Genovese Jr. was walking through Small's Paradise with his cup of coffee, confident, careless, unaware. And then he collided with Bumpy Johnson's booth. Coffee sloshed. Half of it splashed across Bumpy's newspaper, the table, and his sleeve. A mess most people would apologize for. But not Anthony Jr. He looked down at the spill, and he laughed. Not a nervous laugh, not an embarrassed giggle, but a cruel, contemptuous laugh. A laugh that said clearly, "I am untouchable." And that moment froze the room. "Watch where you're sitting, old man," he said, loud enough for everyone in the restaurant to hear, every word dripping with deliberate disrespect, the kind of line meant to provoke, not to amuse. Let that sink in. He didn't apologize. He laughed. In Harlem. In front of witnesses. In front of his father. The air in the restaurant shifted. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Waiters froze mid-step. Every eye turned toward that table. And everyone understood immediately that something far more serious than spilled coffee had just occurred. Because in that world, disrespect wasn't emotional. It wasn't about feelings. It was financial. It was fatal. A man like Bumpy Johnson didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to throw a punch. He simply commanded respect. And this spoiled teenager had just challenged that authority, publicly, loudly, and recklessly. The consequences were already being calculated, even before the coffee dried, even before the laughter faded. A price was being set. Bumpy Johnson finally spoke, quietly, measured, every word precise. "How much is your son worth to you?" he asked. Not a threat, not a yell, just a statement. A question that carried more weight than any gun. The room seemed to hold its breath. Little Oggy Genovese's face paled. He understood immediately that this wasn't a negotiation. It was accounting. And the ledger was about to be written. Then Bumpy paused, slowly, and said the number, $320,000. $320,000 in 1947, a sum so vast it could buy multiple properties, fund significant operations, or wipe out years of profits in a single transaction. Little Augie realized the magnitude. This wasn't punishment for a spilled cup of coffee. It wasn't personal revenge. It was a calculated lesson, priced precisely to teach a spoiled 19-year-old exactly what disrespect costs in Harlem. This wasn't anger. This was accounting. Bumpy didn't raise his voice. He didn't shout. He didn't gesticulate wildly. He raised the invoice. And in that calm, deliberate moment, everyone understood. Privilege and family connections couldn't buy respect. Only earned authority commanded it. And now the cost of arrogance had a dollar sign, a deadline, and a consequence that would be felt for hours to come. By 10:17 a.m., Anthony Genovese Jr. was walking toward his car, 3 blocks from Small's paradise. Confident still, unaware that the world had just shifted. 2 men appeared from opposite directions, moving with precise timing. This was no random mugging. This was a planned operation. Anthony tried to run, tried to scream, tried to do something. But he was 19 years old, inexperienced, facing professionals who had executed dozens of operations just like this. In less than 23 seconds, he was restrained, gagged, and placed in the back of a panel van. The city street continued around him, indifferent. People passed by. Some glanced, some ignored. No one intervened. No one would report it. The world carried on while Anthony's illusion of safety vanished. By the time he realized what had happened, he was already on his way to a warehouse in the South Bronx. A space cold, anonymous and isolated. No windows, no interruptions, no escape. Inside the warehouse, industrial lights hummed overhead. Anthony was zip-tied to a metal chair bolted to the concrete floor, his hands bound behind him. Tension enough to be uncomfortable, but not dangerous. The gag muffled his protests. Silence surrounded him. He wasn't being tortured. He wasn't being beaten. He was being reminded. Humiliation cuts deeper than bruises. And in that empty, harsh light, the lesson had begun. At 1:47 p.m., Marcus produced a large cardboard sign. Bold black letters scrawled across it read, Anthony Genovese Jr., 320,000. He hung it around Anthony's neck with a cord, resting heavily against his chest. The weight was more than physical. It was symbolic. For the first time in his life, he wasn't a prince. He wasn't untouchable. He was merchandise, a literal object, with a price, marked for the lesson he had just earned. The number staring him in the face was more than cash. It was accountability. It was humiliation. It was truth. Marcus photographed Anthony from multiple angles, the sign clearly visible in every shot. Each frame a reminder for his father. Each frame a reminder for Anthony. Every click of the camera reinforced that arrogance has a cost. That privilege doesn't make you immune. And that disrespect can be quantified. The lesson wasn't about pain. It wasn't about rage. It was about memory. And the memory would last a lifetime, because no amount of wealth could erase the weight of a price tag, or the realization of what it represented. Anthony could feel the judgment in every shadow of the warehouse. The silence pressed against him as heavily as the cardboard around his neck. He had never known a moment like this. No entourage, no protection, no inherited authority. For the first time, he understood what the street saw in men like Bumpy Johnson. That respect wasn't automatic. It was earned. And when it wasn't given, it was exacted. And today, Anthony Genovese Jr. was the example. The price paid. The lesson delivered. By 9:47 p.m., little Oggy Genovese arrived at the warehouse, a black Cadillac parked in the loading area as instructed. He stepped out alone, carrying 2 leather suitcases heavy with $320,000 in cash. Every step measured, every eye on the door. He knew the stakes. He knew the humiliation. And yet the relief that his son was alive coursed through him, even as resentment simmered, because the lesson had a price, and privilege alone had not shielded his child. Bumpy Johnson emerged from the shadows at 9:51 p.m. Every movement calm, deliberate, and precise. He walked directly to little Oggy, maintaining eye contact. The power in that gaze was quiet, unspoken. "You're 4 minutes late by my watch," Bumpy said, a deliberate exaggeration to keep the pressure. Marcus methodically counted the stacks of cash. Every bundle confirmed, verified, exact. No mistake, no shortfall, no negotiation. The $320,000 demanded had been delivered. Anthony Jr. was released from his restraints, still wearing the cardboard price tag around his neck, his face pale, eyes wide, the lesson of the day etched in every line. Little Oggy approached, and carefully, slowly, pulled the sign from his son's chest. He wasn't just removing cardboard, he was removing illusion. The illusion that money, privilege, or name could save you from consequences. That arrogance was costless. For the first time, Anthony Jr. saw the tangible value of respect and the invisible cost of foolishness. In that moment, father and son shared a silent understanding. The lesson wasn't complete until it was witnessed. The humiliation, the price, the message, all now visible, undeniable. Every second of the day's events had built toward this exchange, and as the Cadillac doors closed, carrying $320,000 away and a son forever changed, the warehouse returned to darkness and silence. Bumpy Johnson had delivered the message perfectly, and Harlem had watched, even if silently. By 10:14 p.m., the Cadillac disappeared into the night, $320,000 gone, and a lesson burned into the memory of a spoiled 19-year-old. Not revenge, not blood, not headlines, but respect. Respect isn't inherited, it's negotiated. And in 1947, Harlem, it had a market price. One coffee stain, one arrogant heir, 12 hours, $320,000, and a reminder that would hang on a wall for the rest of his life. Anthony Jr. never mocked Bumpy Johnson again, but everyone who knew the story did. The price tag, the photographs, the humiliation, they spread through the streets, through whispers, through fear and respect. Bumpy had done more in one morning than most could in years of planning. He had delivered a lesson with precision, and he had reinforced the rules of the underworld without firing a single shot. If this story hit you, if you believe that power is more complicated than headlines, then you've just scratched the surface. Subscribe to Bumpy Johnson Devoting Dark History, because the real underworld wasn't chaos. It was structure, it was strategy, and every lesson, every insult, every spilled coffee cup came with a cost, a price, and a story that would be remembered long after the money was gone.